We honor another hero, Colleen Patrick-Goudreau, right now, because really her work is life-saving also, yes? I mean, I can complain about animal suffering all day, but you're going to want to eat something, you know, like, so what do we eat? That's the question I always get. Well, Colleen also has launched the 30-day vegan challenge, so that is a wonderful challenge for you to take, the 30-day, so it's 30dayveganchallenge.com, and, oh gosh, just one quick second. So I have my Southern California radio station. The owner was 327 pounds when they brought me on the air there. And the heart surgeon said to him, "Go away, there's nothing we can do for you." He was so desperate, he listened to me. He went vegan. I said, "Go on the Esselstyn program," because he's the heart specialist. So about 6 months ago, 327-pound owner of radio station goes on diet, goes vegan. He's now 255 pounds, and his cholesterol has gone from like 300 to 160 something. So this is the way, you know, to save your life, your family, the planet, the animals. So eat right. Colleen Patrick-Goudreau, her books, she's the compassionate cook. Here, Color Me Vegan. That's one of her wonderful books. Vegan baking, right? The joy of vegan baking. Vegan's Daily Companion. And the vegan table. So you have these, no excuses. You have the reasons to go vegan. You know what to eat. And here's Colleen Patrick-Goudreau.
Thank you, Bob. First of all, I want to give a round of applause to all of you who came to a talk with etymology in the title. I'm really impressed. Or did you not look at the title? You looked at the title, right? So thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Colleen Patrick-Goudreau, and the mission in the work I do is to empower people to make informed food choices, to debunk myths about veganism, to be a voice for animals, and to give people the tools and resources they need to live according to their own values of compassion and wellness. And I do this in a number of ways, particularly through communication and writing, as you saw. I have been doing a podcast for 7 years, and as Bob said, we just launched the 30-Day Vegan Challenge. I've got some postcards here, and I've got some postcards at the table. My formal academic studies were in writing and literature, and I've always been really interested in language, in rhetoric, in etymology, which is the study of the origin of words. And I believe that the way we use language is very telling and very powerful, and can be a very powerful force, really, for good or evil, really. And I advocate for using language that is truthful and compassionate. Our choice of words reflects our values and beliefs and says much about who we are and where we come from. And though I'm not a proponent of what some people derisively call politically correct language, I really do encourage people to use words that say what they mean, that reflect truth and not conceal it. And when it comes to what we eat, we've done a pretty good job of masking not only what we eat, but who we're eating. And interestingly, when we look at the history of the English language, we can definitely point to a time when our language changes in terms of talking about who we eat, the animals specifically, how we name them and how we refer to them. Now, I'm sure you know, I won't do the history of the English language here, but the English language is built from many, many different languages, from Germanic languages, from Anglo-Saxon, from Latin, and after 1066, the Norman invasion, when the Normans, the Northmen who came from the north of France, invaded England, when they came and William the Conqueror took the throne, French became the dominant language. And French became the dominant language particularly in the court and in the administration, and remained such for 300 years. So during the Norman occupation, about 10,000 French words were adopted into English, particularly words having to do with culture. So these are words you probably say every day. You probably know more French than you know. Words having to do with architecture, like castle and tower, vault and buttress, words having to do with law, like jury and verdict, indict, parliament, lease, tax, words having to do with social class, queen and king, duke, baron, knight, earl, count, sovereign, servant, serf, and worker. These were all French words adopted into the English language. Words having to do with warfare, arrow, bow, armor, battle, shield, and spear, words having to do with religion, prayer, priest, abbey, clergy. These are all French words. And words having to do with food. We have many words having to do with food. This really greatly influenced the English language. A la mode, a la carte, cuisine, sauté, puree, flambe. So what I'm interested in is how this language, how this change affects the way we talk about animals. And what's really interesting is you can see a difference from Old English, where we have one word to refer to the animals as living and slaughtered. And then as French comes in and influences the English language, we see two words. Well, I'm sorry, we see one word referring to both the living and the slaughtered animal. And what's interesting, now I'm not suggesting that in Anglo-Saxon England they weren't eating animals prior to the French coming in, but it really changes the way I believe we relate to animals, the way we talk about animals. So if you look at words like pig and swine and boar, these are all Old English words. And these words refer to, so they would have said they're eating a pig, they're living with a pig, it would have been the same word for both. Pig just basically means a young porcine. Swine means an adult porcine. And interestingly, the Proto-Indo-European word that the Old English word pig is built from meant to dig or to furrow, and this reflects a widespread tendency to name animals based on their characteristics or their attributes or their behavior. So what you see is a real celebration of the animals as living beings. So they dug, they furrowed, so that's how they came up with the word pig. Swine, as I said, was just an adult pig, and boar is from West Germanic. And then you look, in the 13th century, we get the word pork from the old French word pork, meaning flesh of pig food. So no longer do we have words that refer to the animals as living beings, celebrating their characteristics. We have a word that refers only to them as the dismembered body parts. Of course, bacon comes from the old French word meaning back meat. And if you've ever made that connection when you look at the word bacon, it comes from the word back. So again, no longer are we celebrating the animals for living beings, we're celebrating them, we're talking about them in terms of where we cut the piece of meat off of their back. The word hog, interestingly enough, refers to a live animal, but it only refers to, is that a plane? No, okay. Not a plane. No, it's good. It feels good. The air is good. It's all good. So you look at the word hog, and it referred only to an animal who was being raised for slaughter. It comes from the Old Norse word hogva, meaning to cut or chop or strike. So that word really never lived outside of the industry as the animal being raised only for human consumption. You look at deer and stag, doe and fawn, and these are all Old English words referring both to the living and slaughtered animal. Again, in terms of naming the animal after a characteristic, it comes from a Proto-Indo-European word meaning breath. I mean, that's the essence of life. So it's a living animal. Stag means a male animal. Doe comes from a word that means to suckle, so referring to something, a very central characteristic of a doe. And fawn comes from the Latin word fetus, meaning offspring. And then we move into the 13th century, and we get the word venison. So no longer are we saying, I mean, we do still say probably, maybe some people say deer, but we really, venison is the word we use to refer to meat of a large game. That's what the word means. And interestingly, this comes from the Latin word venari, which means to hunt, a venatio. In Roman times, during the Roman times, they would, basically what we would call canned hunts today. They would get animals, exotic animals from the far reaches of the Roman Empire, bring them back to Rome, and before the gladiatorial duels, they would have these animals fight each other in what are called venatio. So no longer do we have a word referring to the live animals, it's only a word referring to the animals for slaughter. Then you look at words like cow, steer, bull, and calf, and these are all Old English words, cow always referring to a female. We don't use it just for bovines, obviously. Whales, female whales are called cows, but it only means female. Steer is a male and refers to them being strong. Bull means to roar, and calf comes from a word that means womb or fetus. So again, a young animal. And then in the 13th century, we get boeuf, which turns into beef, which means flesh of a cow or bull, and we get veal, which just means meat of a calf. You see where I'm going here? Isn't this fascinating? I think it's fascinating. I blame the French. I'm just kidding. I didn't mean that. So incidentally, on that same note, and we'll come back to this a little bit, The word cattle comes from the French word châtel, which comes from the Latin word meaning capitale, meaning property or slave or stock. So you can see, when you think of the word chattel, we talk about slave. For a human or non-human, it refers to them being property. And we'll come back to this in a little bit. Just to finish up, we've got sheep, ewe, lamb, and ram. Also, Old English words, sheep meaning female, the female animal, ewe meaning the female animal. Ram and lamb, Old English words, ram meaning strong, and lamb would have been used in Old English to refer to persons of a gentle nature. Lamb doesn't mean persons of a gentle nature, but people would have called other people lambs because they knew they were gentle. So again, celebrating the characteristic of lambs. And then we get mouton in French, meaning flesh of sheep used as food. Mutton is what we refer. We also have, I'm not done, we got chicken, hen, rooster, and cock. Rooster also is an Old English word, rooster coming from the word roost, meaning to perch, so celebrating that aspect of roosters. Chicken, cock, and hen. Chicken comes from a German word, küken. Cock and hen both share a root which means to chant or bird who sings for sunrise. Pretty lovely, I love that. I love that phrase. And then we get poultry. In the 13th century, Old French from pouletrier, which means domestic fowl. So only that animal as raised for domestic purposes, for killing them for human consumption. So what? Right? So what? Are there any implications to this? What's the big deal? So what? I think it is a big deal. I think there are serious implications, and I think we're manifesting them all the time. I think it really changes the way we start relating to animals. Now, this was only, 1,200 years ago. I mean, we domesticated animals 10,000 years ago, but it really shifts the way and continues furthering the separation between humans and non-humans. I think what happens, and you see this reflected in our language, is we literally take the life out of the animal, literally and linguistically. And you can see this in the demonstration I just did. We take away the life and we stop referring to them as living beings, and we refer to them only as the used, exploited, dismembered beings that we consume. And so I would argue that this drastically alters our relationship with them. It distances us from them, and it shapes our perception of them as inanimate objects, here for us, not as the living, breathing, feeling beings that they are. We take away their intrinsic value. We other them. And by othering them, we can then control them and exploit them. That's what othering is. Othering is the act of subordinating someone you deem different than you are. It's not enough to just say you're different. You're actually less than I am. You're under me. You're inferior to me because you're different than I am. And once you can other someone, you can justify doing to them whatever you please. And the most prevalent and powerful way we other animals, I think, is through our use of language. Language that denigrates them, and I would argue contributes to our violence against them. Now, to illustrate this even further, in human history, certain groups, all groups do this, but certainly the ones who have the power, would other humans by calling them animals. Right? And we've seen this throughout history. By doing that, you lower their status as humans. So you dehumanize them by calling them animals. And you create a psychological distance from them that enables you to do to them whatever you please. And I would argue that all discrimination starts from othering. It's kind of like the main component you need. You first have to distance yourself from them, and then you can control them and hurt them. So, certainly these are not surprises to anybody, but we have records documenting white Europeans calling black people, really all non-whites, apes, monkeys, baboons, brutes, savages, and beasts. Now, what's really interesting here is I think as humanitarians we look at that and we feel really uncomfortable that one group is denigrating another group. But as people concerned about animals, we're also uncomfortable with the fact that the lowest thing you could call someone is an animal. So I think something really interesting happens when we start to be aware of our own language and the language that we're offended by when we start to look at this. Of course, white Europeans called Native Americans variations of apes, monkeys, baboons, and brutes, and asses, dogs, and wolves. Certainly, the Americans vilified the Japanese during World War II, especially. And you have to do this in war. In order to kill someone, you have to other them. In order to hurt someone, you have to other them. Otherwise, you would feel empathy for them and you wouldn't be able to do it. So certainly, the Americans vilified The Japanese, they called them savage, they called them apes, monkeys, baboons, they called them dogs, rats, snakes, roaches, and vermin. The Japanese have a long history with China, as you know, with animosity towards each other. The Japanese called the Chinese subhuman, and of course the Nazis called the Jews pigs, vermin, swine, dogs. Vipers. Do I have vipers on there? Vipers. I don't think I've ever used the word viper. That's pretty interesting word. Lice, insects, and of course the Hutus called the Tutsis insects, and more specifically cockroaches in Rwanda and Uganda. And the list goes on and on and on. So the first thing you have to do is to vilify someone, to demean someone, to dehumanize someone by humiliating them. And we do this using animal names because animals are the lowest of the low on the totem pole in terms of power in our society. We made it that way. So the swiftest way you can demean someone else is to call them an animal. And certainly it's enough to just call someone an animal, but to call them something specific like a dog, because we have the spectrum, right, of the animals that are worthy and the animals who are lower than those animals. And so to call someone an insect or a rat or a dog is even more insulting to then just call someone an animal. And of course, to make this effective, we all have to agree first that these animals have these attributes that we've given them, right? We have to agree that they have these characteristics that we abhor. And we've been successfully indoctrinated in this area, so much so that if I were to ask you, why is it offensive to call someone a rat? What does that mean when I say someone's a rat? What words come to mind? What do you think of when I say someone's a rat? Sneaky, dirty, right? Snitch, someone's deceptive, someone's untrustworthy, right? What about pig? Dirty, messy, fat, selfish, gluttonous, right? If I were to ask you, what about a monkey or a baboon or an ape? I know, we're like, I don't know, like what's so wrong about being called a monkey? I'd love to be called a monkey. Primitive, yeah, exactly. Wild, stupid, kind of foolish, mimic, right? That kind of idea. What about dog? It's kind of a mix, right? We do have some positive characteristics or perceptions of animals, but we also have a lot of negative ones. So what about calling someone a dog? Inferior. Anybody ever hear someone call a woman an ugly dog? No? I don't know where you live. I've heard that. Right? But I mean, right, so I did so there you go. You demean dogs and women in one fell swoop there. So obviously, right, so insects, we think of them as kind of lowly and inferior, etc. And snakes, the worst rap of all, what caused the fall of mankind, right? So they never got a good rap. They haven't gotten a good rap in thousands of years. They haven't gotten a good rap. So the question is, do we all agree with these characterizations of these animals because they're intrinsically imbued in these animals, or do we all agree with them because we have given them these characteristics in order that we can separate ourselves from them and not claim our own animalness, right? I mean, is it that these animals inherently imbue these characteristics, or interestingly, is it that we've given them these human characteristics that we want to disown ourselves? So in other words, if we concede that animals were like us, if we concede that we are animals, then we would probably have to question how we treat them, right? We would probably have to really sit down and look at how we treat them if we actually made that connection. And it doesn't stop there. To further this negative perception of animals in our society, we have all of these idioms that we say every single day that reflect this violence against animals, this disdain for animals, and certainly our use of animals. We all have probably said at some point that someone's hogging the road, someone's fat as a hog, eat high on the hog, dirty rat. We call someone a rat who finches, where we say that. Poor finches. Hello, I gotta look at that now. Finches. Finch? Is that the word finch? Snitch. Where did I get finch? I don't know. I'll have to look at finches now. Right, someone's chicken, sitting duck, ugly duckling, dead duck, lame duck, the chicken out. Chickens get a bad rap. A wolf sheep in wolf sheep's clothing, mean as a junkyard dog, treat someone like a dog. He who lies with dogs rises with fleas, easy as shooting fish in a barrel, fish and cut bait, funny as a barrel of monkeys, I don't know what they're doing in a barrel, stubborn as a mule, to eat like a horse, chomp at the bit, more than one way to skin a cat, right? Let the cat out of the bag. Why was she in the bag in the first place? Someone goes ape, right? Catch a tiger by the tail. Weasel out of something in the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, these are just so part of our language that we don't even realize we're saying these things. And this is just scratching the surface. There's a lot more. Now, there are positive idioms too, but that's not my point today. My point is to not call our attention to the positive idioms. So we lower the status of humans by calling them animals, and of course that means we have to agree that animals are below non-human animals. And then we lower the status of animals by taking away their inherent worth and referring to them in really violent ways, and referring to them as things, as machines, as it. I know our language also reflects that. You know, when we refer to an animal as it, as opposed to he or she or them, right? But the point is that you can own things, you can commodify things, you can trade things, you can use things, you can sell things. And this whole relationship we have with animals today really started, I would argue, but I think it's you can't argue with it, with domestication. We domesticated animals 10,000 years ago. And that's not that long ago in our human history. So we domesticated animals 10,000 years ago, and we used to revere them. Prior to this, prior to taking animals to use them for our purposes, they used to be gods to people, right? And then they became worthy only for what they could produce for us. So their own bodies became things that we would benefit from. We commodified their hair, we commodified their skin, we commodified their fur, we commodified their eggs, we commodified their milk. So we took them out of the wild and put them into situations so that we could control them, and that's the ultimate control. So their value became defined only by how they could help us, what they could do for us. So they lose their intrinsic value. And we even say that today, when we refer to them as farm animals, or lab animals, or circus animals, we put them into these compartments even so, valuing them only for what use they have in our society, right? So interestingly, I said before, cattle comes from the word capitale, which means property, slave, or stock. The word for money, pecuniary, comes from the word for cattle. And the word fee also shares a root with the word for cattle. I'm not making this up. I mean, these words are all related. Cattle, property, capital in the sense of, economic sense of the word, wealth, goods, slave, stock, these are all words that share the same root. And they all have to do with the fact that owning livestock is where their value was, how much livestock you had. It was literally the money you had when you exchanged goods at that time. So I have an entire podcast episode called The Taming of the Cattle, where I talk about the history of the animals that we've domesticated. Starting with cattle, we started with sheep and goats, and of course chickens and roosters and cattle. And what we've done is we've quite literally taken their history away from them. I think we have forgotten that these were once wild animals. We refer to them only as domestic animals. We refer to them only as livestock. I'm always putting these things in quotes because they are inherently valuable, but we've made them these things. But again, if we were to give them that history, it would mean that we would have to question what we're doing to these animals. In fact, we don't just deny their wild ancestry and their history, we actually say that animals were part of this agreement. Thank you, Michael Pollan. Because people will say that animals were part of this agreement, that they benefit from this. They benefit from the domestication. We give them something and they give us something back, as if they signed some kind of contract. I'd like to see the contract. And I'd like to see us remove the fences and the tethers to see what they really do want. And it really reminds me, of course, of the slave owners who said that the slaves really loved it. Isn't it great? They've got a roof over their head. They love being slaves. So it's really a convenient way to think. I mean, of course, it reflects our own desire to deny what we're actually contributing to. Now, my work is dedicated to changing our perception of animals and to changing our relationship with animals, because I think the foundation of our problems here is that we see animals as here for us to use and do with as we please. And until that changes, animal abuse and animal exploitation is not going to change. But in order to change our relationship with animals and our perception of animals, we have to change the way we talk about animals. We have to change talking about them from a language of violence and exploitation and mockery to a language of reverence and compassion and nonviolence. So in the spirit of that, and if we have time during the Q&A, we can do more of these, but I thought I would offer some compassionate versions of these more violent idioms. It is so absolutely powerful. The advocacy that we could do with just our language is so exciting. Because when people hear you change the words you use from something they know is familiar enough, right? Some metaphor that they've heard, and they know that you've changed it because it starts making them reflect on the one that's really violent. So for instance, how often do we say we kill two birds with one stone? And how often do we hear other people say this, right? But if we said to them, you know, I went home and I put some food on the stove and I took a nap, I cut 2 carrots with 1 knife, they'd go, what did you just say? And they said, wow, so what do we normally say? We say to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Oh my God, that's really violent, isn't it? And they start hearing it for the first time. And then you can have this conversation and they start thinking of all these other ways that we really are violent against animals through our use of words. And I promise you, when you start changing to the compassionate versions from the more familiar ones, it's awkward at first because it's so ingrained in us to say these idioms that we all grew up with. It doesn't work very much when you try to translate these idioms into other languages. These are very strictly English idioms, but every language has their own idioms. But when you change it, it is so exciting and you start to get used to it. So really practicing it is how you can get used to it. So if you said to someone, instead of there's more than one way to skin a cat, there's more than one way to peel a potato, or there's more than one way to squeeze a lemon, it's familiar enough that they hear it for the first time. So it still expresses the meaning, but and does it in a visual way, but not in a violent way. There's no use beating a dead horse. I suppose some people would say, well, he's already dead, but I don't really think we need to conjure up an image of a dead horse being beaten, so there's no use watering a dead flower. Lovely, nonviolent, right? And again, gets to the point without this violence against animals. Let's shoot the bull, let's shoot the breeze, I think is familiar enough. But once you start to realize, oh God, I've been saying shoot the bull, then you kind of realize this is an animal we're talking about. It's not just some word that's meaningless. Take the bull by the horns, jump in with both feet, take the plunge. I don't know, take the handlebars, the bicycle by the handlebars. Doesn't work. You can work on your own. You don't have to use mine. These are just mine. This one was so interesting because I use that a lot in my own speech to pigeonhole something. And it wasn't until I went to Italy that I actually, when I saw pigeonholes, that I changed my language on this because I didn't realize what I was saying. But I think we were in a city called Orvieto in Umbria, and we were in these caves where they had these rooms where they would raise pigeons, and they had all these holes dug out on the walls where the pigeons would roost, but they would be kept in this room until they used them, to kill them, to eat them. And so I saw pigeonholes, and I saw what they looked like in this room that was, where all these pigeons were confined. So I don't say pigeonhole anymore, so I say compartmentalize, which again, really gets to the point. It doesn't have to be visual, it gets to the point. Open a can of worms. I don't think worms want to be in a can, so open a can of spaghetti. And people hear it right away. As soon as you say that, someone goes, open a can of spaghetti. Oh, open a can. You even like worms? I mean, I've had people say, like, you even care about worms? Like, but what about worms? And you can start to have this whole dialogue about worms, okay? So many people say that. I hear vegans use this expression. I hear animal advocates use this expression. Now, I've met a lot of pigs, and they do eat very voraciously. It's true. They like to eat. I like to eat. but it doesn't define me. So I don't think we want to use an expression that characterizes pigs for one thing, right? So to pig out, eat like a pig, how about to be gluttonous or to eat like a glutton? Works for me, much gentler for the pigs. Don't put the cart before the horse. Don't put your shoes on before your socks. Or don't cut the bread before it's baked. So with a little creativity, we can come up with our own, and if we do have time, we can talk about some. But just start practicing it. It's really, really powerful when you start practicing it, and when you start to be aware of your own language. Now, returning to the language of food, one of the things I do in my work is to try and take veganism out of the box, because we tend to have this notion that there's normal, and here's more words for us, regular food and normal food over here, and then there's vegan food over here, as if it's its own separate food group, right? So I really encourage people, and I use vegan food in quotes, because vegan food is fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and beans and mushrooms and herbs and spices, right? When you're talking baked goods, it's flour and sugar and baking powder and baking soda and yeast and cocoa and chocolate, right? Vanilla. It's not so unfamiliar, but when you take it out of the box called vegan, it feels a lot more familiar. People eat vegan food all the time, they just don't call it vegan. We don't say we eat vegan bananas. Could I have a vegan apple, please? It's just an apple. So we need to take these words out of the box and not make it so like you have to be in a certain group to eat these foods. I mean, it really sounds like you have to be in a club to eat these foods. Vegan food is real food. It's not fake food. And I really I feel very strongly, because I hear people talk about vegan food that makes it sound unreal, or that makes it sound really unappetizing, which, if you know my work, you know why I feel very strongly about not using words. Did I press that button before I was supposed to? Did y'all see that before I was supposed to? Okay, I lost my moment there. But faux and fake, imitation, mock, substitute, analog, replacement, alternative, if you didn't see that, that's what I'm talking about. Because I don't eat fake food. I don't eat faux food. I don't eat analogs. I mean, would you like an analog? How appetizing is that? If we think that we're going to use food to advocate for a compassionate and healthful, delicious way of living, I don't think we want to lead with analogs, right? And it's one of the reasons I really encourage people to take back the word meat. The word meat is an Old English word that originally meant that which was eaten. It distinguished it from, it was solid food to distinguish it from drink. And we say it today when we say nut meat and we say coconut meat, right? So we need to take back the word meat, because the more we use words that make it sound like, these words like fake and faux and imitation and substitute, we're basically, first of all, just really undermining the beauty and the power and the abundance of this way of living and eating. But we're also agreeing with the status quo and the dominant animal eating culture that meat, dairy, and eggs are the barometer by which we have to measure everything else, right? That anything that's not meat, dairy, and eggs is inferior, that it's a substitute, that it's an alternative. To what? To that? So if we use those words, then we're not empowering people, we're not exciting people, and we're really continually agreeing that meat, dairy, and eggs is what we have to measure everything against. Same thing with the word milk, We don't drink milk substitutes. The only substitute in our diet is when we consume non-human animal milk. Because the only milk that we need to consume is our own species milk, right? And the only time we substitute that is when we consume animal-based milk, non-human animal-based milk. That's the imposter in our diet. Plant-based milks are not a substitute. It's animal milk that's a substitute for human milk, right? And we need to reflect that. So I don't drink milk substitutes. I don't drink milk alternatives. Non-vegans don't drink regular milk and real milk. And vegans, I'm sorry, but they don't drink milk spelled with a Y, okay? It's M-I-L-K. And I say that because we are giving the dairy industry that word, and they think they own that word, and they want to own that word. They've been trying to make it illegal for plant-based beverage companies, soy milk companies, to not use the word milk. They don't want anybody else to use the word milk, right? So soy milk and everything, they want them to use the word beverage, right? So just tell any lactating mother that she has to say she has breast beverage and not breast milk, because she's not allowed to use that word. And if they could make it illegal and make her pay them every time she said that, they probably would, right? So it's plant-based milk. It's soy milk. It's almond milk, it's rice milk, whatever, let's call it what it is. Or if it's animal milk, we have to call it what it is, not regular milk. And we need to correct people when they say it, gently, respectfully. When people say, oh, do you have any real milk? Or do you mean cow's milk? Or do you mean goat's milk? Would you like some human milk? You have to clarify. Because I don't know what you're talking about when you just say milk. I don't know. Could be rat's milk, right? So we need to make people accountable for the words that they're using, and we need to reflect those words as well. Calling them what they are. Same thing with butter. You know, I use non-dairy butter, dairy-based butter, plant butter. You know, some people say, oh, you're vegan, so what kind of butter are you bake? What kind of butter do you use? Oh, you use the fake butter. And they'll say it innocently enough. And I say, no, it's not fake butter. It's butter. It's just using plant fats instead of animal fats. That's the distinction there. And the word butter really has to do with fat more than anything else. It doesn't have to do with animal products. We say peanut butter, coconut butter, almond butter, right? Butter has to do with fat. It doesn't have to do with animal products. So we can say, I'm a plant-based butter, etc. Take back the word butter, and not imitation, not fake. I don't even like to use the word margarine. People think of a very specific thing when they think of margarine, kind of the old, you know, can't believe it's not butter kind of thing, which is gross and trans fats, and it's just not good. So I don't even like to use the word margarine. And I gently correct people when they do use them, because it's still in our culture. People do still say that word. Cheese is another one. You know, dairy versus non-dairy, but calling it what it's from. So a plant-based cheese, or a nut-based cheese, or a soy milk-based cheese, you know, almond milk-based cheese. These are all human-made. You know, cheese from animal milk is human-made. This isn't like some god came down and gave us this milk. So like, you know, we just used animal milk at one time. It's time to stop. And now we're using nuts to make cheese and to make milk. So let's call it what it is, not fake cheese, not real or regular cheese. You know, eggs, when it comes to eggs, I really do like reminding people whose body these things came out of. I don't know if there's, it could be robin's eggs they're asking for, I don't know, or human eggs, probably not. But still, I think saying chicken's eggs really brings it back and really reminds people that there was a body behind those eggs. And I do really love the word secretions. Those who know my work. It's such a great word. And I say that because I don't like to use the word animal products. I might put that in quotes also when I'm talking to people, because the word products really talks about the commodification of the animal and their secretions. And I like the word secretions because it is what it says what it is. It's a very truthful word. And it's a word that makes people stop and go, ooh, like, we have secretions. What do you mean? Like, and well, anything that comes out of an animal, oh, that's, you know, and they start to think about it. But it doesn't turn them off so much that they're not going to have a conversation anymore. And I know there are some people who use, you know, when they talk about chicken's eggs, they might say, like, it's a chicken's period. It's not going to work. Like, it turns people off pretty quickly. And corpse, like, right away to say, you know, oh, you're eating corpse. You're eating a corpse. And I'm like, okay, if you want to just like not have a dialogue with that person and make them walk away thinking that you're just offensive, then go for it. I just don't think that creates a dialogue. I don't want people to walk away thinking about me. I don't want people to think about me. I want people to think about the animals, and I want them to start thinking about what it is they're contributing to and help them realize that they don't have to contribute to that violence against animals anymore. One of the ways it's really interesting that we do this all the time, and it kind of goes back to this old English lesson that we just did, is, oops, I'm upside down, is when we talk about, when we ask people, do you eat chicken, do you eat turkey, right? It's very interesting because the word chicken, as I said before, and turkey and duck, these are all Old English words, and my point was that we take these Old English words that said what they meant, and then we change them to the French words that doesn't talk about the animals as living animals. But now we've used this so much that we're kind of inured to them, so that if you say to someone, do you eat chicken? They'd say, I love chicken, I do eat chicken. Do you eat turkey? Yep, love turkey. You know, do you eat fish? Yep, I eat fish. But when they think about that, they only think about the dismembered animal. They don't think about the living animal. So if you change that, it's very powerful. One letter changes it, and you said, do you eat chickens? They'd go, well, no, I don't eat chickens. I eat chicken, I don't eat chickens. Immediately, that plural puts the animal back into it. It's so powerful. What? I didn't do anything. It's so cool, and it's really, again, I love watching people's reactions when you do this. It's so powerful. You can have so much advocacy just asking a question. So instead of, do you eat turkey? I love turkey. Do you eat turkeys? No? And they start thinking about these beautiful living animals. Do you eat duck? You know, people would order duck on the menu. They would call duck. But if, you know, do you eat ducks? And they think about these Precious, precious babies. Even fish, pluralizing fish, which is a perfectly acceptable plural use of the word. So do you eat fishes reminds them of the animal. It just puts the animal back into the word, so they don't think of the dismembered animals. They think of these beautiful, living, feeling beings like Linus, my beautiful baby. So what I'm saying is that through our language, we all participate in this system that belittles animals, that advocates for violence, that minimizes their suffering, that perpetuates cognitive dissonance, that commodifies animals, and it legitimizes our use and institutionalized use and abuse of them. By changing our language, we change our perceptions. And when our perceptions are changed, that's reflected in our language. It's this whole cycle that happens. And I personally believe that change will occur for animals only when we change. Only when we, the ones who hold the power, change their status in society. And one of the ways we can change their status in society is by changing our perception of them. And one of the ways we can change our perception of them is changing the way we talk about them. Our liberation from violence towards animals and each other isn't going to come until we change the paradigm. Every word we use can contribute to continuing this current existing paradigm that agrees that animals are here for us to hurt, and animals are here for us to use, and animals are here for us to use, and they're here for us to kill, and ours to do with however we please. Or we can choose language every time we open our mouths that reflects a compassionate paradigm, one that sees animals as ours to share this planet with, not as objects and subjects of ours, but as cohabitants, as fellow earthlings. We can shift that paradigm every time we open our mouths to eat and to speak. And in this compassionate paradigm, it would be a compliment to be called an animal and not an insult. After all, that's who we are. And in embracing our animal selves, human animals would find humility, and non-human animals would be raised up, perhaps not as gods, but as whole, complex, beautiful, wondrous beings worthy of dignity and respect, where their bodies and their offspring are theirs to claim and cherish, not ours to use and destroy. And in this compassionate paradigm, we would value animals for who they are and not for what gain we get by them. And we would recognize that we're a lot more like them and they're a lot less like us than we've let ourselves believe. In this compassionate paradigm, we would be worthy of being called an animal whose root word means soul, something human animals are in danger of losing if we continue to deny non-human animals theirs. For the animals, thank you for listening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you. For Linus. Thank you. Okay. Do we have time for some questions? Oh, I don't have my phone. Amanda, you have my phone. What time is it? I need a visual. We got 10. No, are we done? We have a minute. We have someone help.
12 minutes.
Do we really? I have the rest of the hour?
Yeah, I go up by 15.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. Okay, we got 12 minutes. Yes, sir.
Instead of saying bring home the bacon, they can say bring home the broccoli.
Bring home the broccoli. I love it. I love it. Yes. Sure. So she said one of the things she's coming up against a lot now is the whole grass-fed, free-range movement. I'm always struck when I see free-range chicken sign at farmers markets. I said, they're not free-ranging anymore, are they? They're not free, they're not ranging. They're just turning on your little pole. Yeah, it's just, it's really amazing. And that's a movement where language is really used to mask what's really going on. In fact, that whole movement, they're really advocates of not saying slaughter, but using harvest, process. They don't want to use those words because they know that people hear them and are, hear them for what they are. Yeah, I mean, look, it's, I believe that the problem is that we use animals, and we perceive them as here for us, and so there is no way to do it that that isn't violent. And so I'm not a proponent. I'm actually working in Oakland. We co-founded a group called Neighbors Opposed to Backyard Slaughter because there's a whole movement. It's very trendy. It's very hip to try and get cities to pass laws so that it becomes legal to keep and breed and kill animals in their backyards. It's the acronym is No BS. Just want to make sure that's clear. Neighbors Opposed to Backyard Slaughter, No BS. And it's noslaughter.org, and you can find out more about that. So yeah, I mean, it's when we hear people say that, we have to speak back to it. And I'm not even talking in terms of how the animals are raised. I'm not going to even get into that discussion yet because there's so much to say when they say something like, "Oh, I get free range" or "I get happy meat." Last night we have our neighbors have a happy hour every Friday, which is so lovely. We just moved to this neighborhood and we love our new neighbors. And I was talking to a woman who watched, she watched Forks Over Knives and she watched all these movies and she said, "I'm just eating fishes now." And when it came up, she didn't say fishes, I did. But then it came up a little later on that she said, "But I'm still eating, goat's cheese and goat's milk." And she said, "It's just, people don't want to believe they're contributing to cruelty." And she said, "But they don't factory farm goats the way they do the other animals." And I said, "Yes, they do." I said, "Yes, they do." And you have to play it in a way that's going to still get them to stay with you, right? So I was like, "Yes, they do. I know, I love goats." And I said, "But it's true." I said, "It's horrible, but it's true. Of course they do. They treat them the same way they treat the other animals." We have to push back when people use this language that condones their behavior. The only way we're going to be able to be voices for animals is if we push back. Now, we as advocates can work on being the most respectful and compassionate, but truthful at the same time. And we have to find our voices to do that. You have to find your voice. You have to find your comfort level. You might stumble. It might feel uncomfortable, but what's wrong with that? It's uncomfortable, right? I'm not saying create enemies. I want us to create dialogue with people who appear to be different than we are. They're not. They're the same. And if we can speak to the compassion that's in people's hearts, and I really believe that people are compassionate. That's why everybody says they're vegetarian, but they still consume chickens, right? That's why people say, "Well, I'm vegetarian too." "Well, I eat chicken, I eat turkey, and I'm just not eating red meat," because they know that it's the higher ethic. They know that it's something they aspire to. So I believe that people are compassionate and they are there. And I think that's what we need to speak to. And I think that's the most effective way to go about it. So, Hope.
I have a comment and a question. Something that often, a couple of people, a few people I have had say to me, "Well, I'm not comfortable calling myself a vegan. I don't want that label." And so what I offer is well, you eat vegan food. You eat a plant-based diet. Labeling the food and not yourself.
Right.
So that's, if you ever come across that, I think that's a good language thing to offer. The question I have is, so I totally agree with everything you're saying with not using the terms like fake or faux or analog meat. But then what do we say? I mean, and so if you're saying this chicken product is soy-based chicken, it's hard because most of them are made of soy or gluten, and unfortunately those two products have kind of a bad connotation in the health community. So I don't like using gluten. So everybody's like, "Oh, I don't do gluten,"
I know.
So what do we say?
Yeah.
What are the positive things to label that food as?
For sure, and I didn't go through it. I think it was on the screen, but I didn't really say it. One of the things I love about Field Roast so much is that David Lee, who's the founder, totally gets this, and they've embraced the word meat on their packaging. It's grain-based meat. Now, to your point, it's wheat-based, but grain-based meat, I think it's beautiful. We can say nut-based meat. We can say grain, say exactly what it's made from. Wheat-based meat. Soy might come up, but I might not lead with it because everyone thinks that you become vegan, you have to eat soy, like it's a prerequisite. I tell them it's not a prerequisite. But so I might not lead with it, but it's just plant-based meat. And I actually do my spiel of, the word meat, and I kind of do the whole thing, and it makes people go, "Oh, that's so interesting, you're right, I say coconut meat." So I have the conversation that makes them kind of have a little bit of a shift, but use the positive word. So call it what it is so that it feels really good. Nut meat, because even just vegan meat or, and they might start with fake. The person I'm talking to might say, "Oh, so yeah, I had some fake meat." Well, what was it, grain-based meat? So we can keep pushing that dialogue a little bit. But I don't know if that helps, but make it the positive thing, and kind of, it also might shift according to who you're talking to. Sometimes it just changes according to who's on the other side of it and who your audience is. But yeah. Yes, sir.
I've come up against a number of men that where, when I'm talking about, factory farming and the animals and killing the animals, they literally say, I don't care.
Yeah.
The animals are, I don't care about that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to eat them, and they're there for me to eat. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that?
Yeah.
Have you come up against that?
So one of the things I really think makes us good advocates is first starting in here before I even open my mouth. My perception. And if I'm talking to someone and really believed they didn't care, I wouldn't have a really good conversation with them. And I wouldn't really want to have a conversation if I really believed that person was kind of cold and didn't have compassion. So I actually believe the person I'm talking to is compassionate. And because I believe it. I mean, I really do believe it. I really do believe that person who even says, I don't care, cares. And I might, again, it depends on who it is and what the conversation is and how it comes up, but I might ask them, they might start talking about, I might get them to talk about their dog, or I might get them to talk about, even if they grew up on a ranch, to talk about what it was like when they killed those animals for the first time, or what was it like to be raised with animals. I guarantee you, they will come to a point where they say, yeah, it was really hard, and we couldn't name our animals and whatever, we did it, we got rid of them, but man, it was really hard. They care. That's they reveal it right there. So I would speak to that and go underneath what they say, because I don't even kind of get it. So it depends on what the conversation is. I know there's people who say, well, you should only talk about the health because people only care about the health and they don't care about the animals. I don't agree with that. My advocacy is about compassion, and that's what I'm going to talk about. If it works for other people to talk about health, great. But my advocacy is compassion, including compassion for yourself, and that's why I advocate eating healthful whole foods. But I want to tap into that, and I want to get to that, and I want to get underneath that person. Now, I realize sometimes you're having a 30-second conversation with someone. It doesn't always manifest that. But if we can keep getting to the compassion and keep believing that the people we're talking to are compassionate and believe the best that's in them and raise the bar, I think our conversations will just be powerful and amazing and thought and change provoking. And I really believe it, and I believe it because it's what I do and it's what I see all the time. So if we believe the best that's in people and if we speak to the highest that's in people, I think they respond with that. Thank you. It's true. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I come across people who say, I really want to eat healthy, but being vegan is so extreme.
I know, that's when you give them the 30-day vegan challenge card. Yeah, I mean, you can have fun with that, because I could say, well, I'm extremely compassionate. You got me. That's extreme. That's why I talk about, it's people want to put vegans in a box because they kind of want other vegans, right? They're othering vegans. They're not like me. They have discipline. Oh, they can do it. I can't do it. It's so crazy. It's so extreme. It's so different than who I am. It's so different than how I eat. If we can reel it in, show them how familiar it is that they're already eating vegan food. That might be the first thing I say to someone who says, oh, it's so extreme. Really, it's fruits and vegetables and nuts and beans and seeds and grains and herbs and spices. And they go, oh, yeah. Right? Immediately when you go, you're already eating vegan. Come on, you're already eating vegan. They go, yeah, you're right. And I said, and then you can talk extreme. It's pretty extreme to bring animals into this world only to kill them. That's pretty extreme. It's a pretty extreme paradigm that we've created. It's pretty extreme, to impregnate females just so she produces milk, just so we can take her milk and take away her baby. That's extreme, right? But living compassionately and doing the best I can to be as kind and compassionate as possible, that's not extreme. So again, I turn everything on its head when I talk to people. I won't let them have it. I won't let them have it. And they can't, because they want to walk away with that, and they just kind of sometimes just throw it at you, and I won't let them, have it. So we kind of have to be on our toes. I mean, I'm on my toes just because this is what I love to do, and it takes a little longer to give a spiel about the etymology of meat. I realize that. It might take a couple minutes longer, but man, it's really powerful. It just really gets underneath it, and I really see a lot of change happen from it. How are we good on time? One more? If there is one, maybe there's not. Yes.
So you use the word
Yeah, so if someone says, so you're vegan, oh, so you don't need any, so what do you need? I said, well, I don't need anything that comes, I might say I don't need any flesh or secretions of an animal. I mean, that might be an, example of how I say it, or I might say I don't need anything that comes off of or out of an animal. And they go, they're starting to think of things that come out of an animal. It's kind of, it's not so appetizing, I love the word secretions. And you see people's head, they go, what, secretions? It's powerful. It's really cool. Yeah, secretions, yay. If you leave here with anything today, leave here saying secretions. You don't have to. Anyway. Well, I'll be at my table if you'd like to come over, and thank you very much for coming today. I appreciate it.